Section 3, the U.S. in East Asia. Focus question, how and why did the U.S. extend its influence in Asia? Question, question, question. This is the one place, really the rest of the world's kind of already gobbled up a bit of, well, they've gobbled up Africa, so that's out of play. We kind of naturally see Latin and South America as an extension of the United States, so we're really not interested in becoming maybe an imperial power there. We kind of see ourselves as already playing a pretty dominant and important role. The one place that we really want to try and get our foot in the door is Asia. So the causes and the consequences of the Philippine insurrection. I mean, it doesn't probably take much of a rocket scientist to figure out that when the Filipinos see the United States granting Cuba its independence, they naturally kind of assume that maybe they're going to get it theirs next. And so, and plus, Aguinaldo and the Filipinos fight side by side with the Americans, so they see this as their opportunity at liberation and their opportunity at freedom and their opportunity at having their own country. And pretty shortly after it's over, the United States takes complete control of the Philippines. So Aguinaldo then takes this already natural leadership position and turns against the United States and rebels against U.S. rule. And they're very effective at fighting a guerrilla war in the Philippines. And ironically, the United States, if you look at the quote on page 264, they end up turning around and using the very same methods that the Spanish did, that we called as barbaric and horrible and terrible. And you know, the Spanish are portrayed as being bloodthirsty apes and animals and killing the Cubans, and then we turn around and do the same thing to the Filipinos. And that really strikes some of the people in the United States as a little bit more than they can maybe handle, or strikes them as being just too hypocritical. And then, you know, ironically, again, if you look at eugenics and the belief of the time, this should not have been a very long war, and in fact it's the complete opposite. It lasts much longer. Nearly 4 years. There's a far greater loss of life for American soldiers, and it is a brutal war on the Filipinos. So this is going to have long-lasting effects and impacts on the state of affairs between the Philippines and the United States. Taft comes in and leads a reform effort and promises self-rule, and he works towards that. And after World War II, the United States grants the Philippines full independence, so eventually they get there. If we analyze the effects of the open door policy, we want the ability to trade in China. And so again, China's weak, and we are drawn by the lure of millions of consumers. And we don't like this idea that there's going to be these spheres of influence in China where each country is going to kind of gobble up a section of China and they're going to control that sphere. We want to be able to go in there and compete, and may the best man win. And so we're declaring equal trade in China, and John Hay is trying to negotiate a treatment of equal commerce, and that's maybe not going as well as he had hoped. But then the Boxer Rebellion happens with the secret societies that rebel against these foreign rulers, and once they kill mercenaries, then the United States and these other countries, Japan and Russia, Great Britain and France, gang up on the Boxers and defeat them. And it's at that point that Hay reaffirms the open door policy, where there's no colonies in China but free trade, and we're able to get our foot in the door. And so now that we have access to China, it makes the need to hold on to the Philippines even greater. And how the United States dealt with the rising power of Japan. Japan's looking to extend its influence, and it needs access to raw materials. It's an island nation, and it doesn't have all of the coal and oil and iron that it needs to keep its industrial powerhouse running. And so they need to begin to get colonies in Asia. So they target mineral-rich places. The first one is Manchuria. Unfortunately, Russia is already there, who wants to hold on to Manchuria, and a war breaks out. And this is going to have a major impact on the politics of race again, because in the theory of the time, even though Russia is a weak European power, they're probably still going to be far greater and tougher and stronger than the Japanese, and that just simply isn't the case. And if we look at how we're dealing with it, at first Roosevelt is kind of siding with Japan because he thinks that Japan's going to have trouble against Russia, and he wants to establish this balance of power. And then when Japan whoops Russia, that kind of throws a kink into things, and so when he goes to negotiate the peace settlement, he makes sure he kind of stabilizes and maybe steps in and helps Russia become a little bit more powerful to counterbalance the rising power of Japan. But the other thing that happens is you see Japan and the United States getting into an ideological war over the treatment of the Japanese on the West Coast, and they sign this gentleman's agreement. And if you look at the Japanese, pretty early on, they're pretty shrewd negotiators. They understand the way the world works, and they understand a little bit the way the world views things, and they take advantage of that to get some concessions. And we're going to see that again a little bit later on at the conclusion of World War I. And one of the things that Roosevelt does is, in response to the growing power of the Japanese, has the Great White Fleet built and set sail and make sure that they stop off at Tokyo Bay so that they can kind of flex their muscles a little bit. And he builds the Great White Fleet and sends it on the worldwide tour as a show of force, to try and maybe convince Japan to be a little careful in the Pacific and not to test us too much. But you can kind of see this eventual showdown that's going to take place in at Pearl Harbor in the makings already here in 19